right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here to view this presentation about how to be a good remote worker. My name is Brie Reynolds. I'm the Career Development Manager of FlexJobs. Really happy to be partnering with Mental Health America to talk about this topic because so many people have become remote workers in the last 8 months or so, and so many others are looking to work remotely in the long term. So figuring out what it takes to be a good remote worker and how to do this well can be really good for you just as an individual to figure out how to manage the day-to-day life of a remote worker, and then can also be really helpful as you look to the future and potentially if you're considering working remotely over the long haul. So hopefully the things that I share today will be helpful for all those scenarios wherever you fall into them. So just a couple notes. This presentation will probably be about 30 minutes of me giving you some ideas. We'll talk about shared expectations, manager and coworker dynamics, home office space, gear and equipment, and then best practices. I will also be, at the end of this, answering a few questions that we typically get from people who view this presentation. So hopefully there'll be some questions in there that you would have that will be answered. And that's how we'll go for today. So just a little bit about FlexJobs before we get started. We are really happy, as I said, to be partnering with Mental Health America on these types of topics. We are a job search website that specializes in remote and flexible work. We've been around since 2007. I've been with FlexJobs since 2010, and I run our career coaching program. You can see our lovely coaches on the screen. We help job seekers figure out how to find remote work and how to be good remote workers when they actually get there. We also have a lot of resources on our site that can help you if you're searching for a remote job or you're interested in working remotely. So those are just some things to check out. We have a company database. We have a great blog with lots of good articles that will help you from start to finish, from the actual job search process and finding a remote job to performing as a remote worker. So feel free to check out FlexJobs. So let's dive into some best practices and tools for remote work. So what I'm going to talk about in this presentation really is geared towards full-time remote work. So for people who are working from home all of the time and either never or very rarely going to an office. But I do think if you wind up in a hybrid situation where you're at home sometimes, you're working from the office other times, the information here could still be really helpful. So just to kind of set the expectations there. One of the things I want to talk about are the remote skills that we see really good remote workers embracing and encouraging in themselves and building. So some of these you might already have, which is great. So pat yourself on the back for any that you have. And then some you may want to take some time to actually build and focus on and get stronger in. So the one that always comes up most is remote communication. So verbal and written communication, being able to communicate your ideas, your questions, anything like that, when you are in a remote work environment. Because when you're working remotely, you don't have body language as a stand-in for the part of the communication that you're having with your remote teams. And so you really need that written and verbal communication piece to be strong. The second is time and task management, the ability to focus, basically being your own self-manager so that you are responsible for sitting in your seat, getting your work done, and you can hold yourself accountable to that. Being proactive with your questions, this goes back to those written and verbal communication skills, but I really wanted to touch on it as its own thing, because when you're a remote worker, it is really important to be able to speak up for yourself, to ask questions, to make sure that you are getting the information and the resources that you need to succeed, because the better you're able to access those things, the better you'll be able to do your job. And I know sometimes myself included, we get maybe a little bit nervous to be asking questions of our coworkers or a boss, or we think maybe we're asking too many questions. But this has to do with if you need a piece of information or a resource or a piece of equipment, or you just want to clarify something to make sure you're understanding it correctly, all of those things go into this proactive questioning and being unafraid to speak up for yourself. The next is being comfortable with technology, basic troubleshooting skills, because as we've all experienced before, technology is unpredictable, and just when you think you have things kind of ironed out, something may go wrong. So one example I really like to give is if your Wi-Fi or your internet goes out suddenly, and it was working fine, and then all of a sudden it's not working. What do you actually do in that case? Do you know what to do to troubleshoot that issue? So understanding that basic level of troubleshooting You don't have to be a computer whiz or some kind of like tech genius. I'm certainly not, but just being able to get yourself out of those situations where you may get stuck with technology and know those first basic troubleshooting things that you need to do. Having a growth mindset is also really important with remote work and really with all work right now. We see this across the board with most employers, whether they're hiring for remote jobs or in-office jobs. Embracing change and being willing and able, but also enthusiastic about learning new things is something that employers are really looking for. And with remote work, especially, things change pretty quickly. You change the types of programs and tools that you use because something better comes along where there's an upgrade. You may change your office setup. You may be constantly finding new tools and gadgets and things that you like to use. So there's a lot of change that goes into how you're actually working. And then, of course, just embracing change on a larger scale in terms of learning new things for your job, for your profession, to advance yourself. Those are all really important qualities. And then being familiar with digital communication tools. So being familiar with how remote teams work and what tools they use, which I've got here on the next slide. So these, we asked, I think it was over 140 remote teams and companies, how do you communicate and what tools do you use on a daily basis? What are your main go-to tools for remote work? And these were the things that they came back to us with. So instant messenger, video conferencing, file sharing and document collaboration, and virtual office environments are kind of the top 4 types of tools. So on this list, you'll see that we also have some brand names listed. Those teams did tell us that these are the specific tools that they use within those topic areas. So Slack, Google Chat, and HipChat for instant messenger. I won't read the entire list, but you can see some of those other ones listed there. What I would recommend is, if you are currently a remote worker, just make sure that you understand, and you can ask your manager this, you might ask HR because they might have some policies around it, which tools you really need to be using on a daily basis to communicate with your team, and also asking your team how they prefer to be communicated with. So for some people, they really like Slack because it's quick back and forth, it's that online chat, it feels very real time. But for others, they prefer email because they like a chance to think about things. And sometimes it depends on the topic or the question that you have, which medium is going to be the best one. So I would go ahead and ask people about that. And I think I talk about that in a further slide as well. Then there is file sharing and document collaboration in virtual office environments. I would take a look at these. Any of these that you don't know, in order to build up these skills, it's actually really easy. You could pick 1 or 2 from each category and then actually go out and try the free versions or the free trials that they have to build up those skills. Most of these offer a free version or a free trial, so you can go out and either download those or sign up for an account. And then you can also get lots of great tutorials on YouTube. Each of these, their own websites have pretty good tutorials as well. So I would say, as part of that growth mindset and embracing change, you can learn a couple of different platforms here that you may not already be familiar with. This is especially good to do if you are seeking remote work, so you're looking for a remote job, because once you learn all of these different platforms, at least a basic level, you don't have to be a moderate or an expert level at these, but at a basic understanding, you can start to put them on your resume as things that you're familiar with. And that way, employers see you as somebody who is prepared for remote work because you're understanding the tools that are going to be used. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the gear and equipment, the kind of nuts and bolts of working remotely. First, you want to get what you really need. So I know even 8 months ago, I've been working from home for 10 years. And 8 months ago, my husband also was sent to work from home at the beginning of the pandemic. I've never worked in a house with someone else every day, all day. So we had one home office that was mine. And all of a sudden we needed 2 home offices, or at least we needed 2 spaces where people could do home office work. And for the first couple of months, I gave up my very nicely appointed 10-year-old equipped home office because my husband was brand new to remote working and I wanted him to be comfortable. And I was like, oh, I'll get by. I totally understand how this works. I'm used to it. And I set up kind of a makeshift space. And for a couple months, I used that. And then I realized I'm really uncomfortable in this space. So I thought, how can I make this more comfortable for myself? How can I create a new home office space, even in this strange little corner of a room that I had dug out for myself? So that's what you really want to think about is, you may have done a little bit here and there over the last 8 months, but what can you do to really set yourself up to be comfortable and to help you focus on your remote work? So first think about if work will give you any equipment. If you are currently working, sometimes your office may offer you some sort of technology stipend or home office stipend to update your home office as you see fit to get a new chair or a standing desk or a new monitor, anything like that. They may also provide you with certain equipment. So if you were moved home from working in the office, you should ask, is it possible that when I was in the office, I found it really comfortable to have a dual monitor. Working from my laptop has been pretty uncomfortable on my neck. I'm starting to get some strain. Would it be possible for me to have a second monitor sent to my home office? And especially if you are really physically uncomfortable, you should be able to ask for those accommodations and things like that. So other things that people find really helpful when we talk to remote workers who have done this for a long time, definitely an external monitor. Working off of your laptop monitor, it can be really tricky. You get hunched, you're looking down. It's really bad for your posture. You want a monitor that really is going to let you look straight on. And you can also kind of set it up. I have my laptop on one side and my second monitor on the other. So now I have dual screens, but I've set them up with different levels and things to be at the right height for me. So that's really important. And then a full keyboard and a mouse is also really helpful. Wireless if possible, because then it just creates a more clutter-free environment. You can do Bluetooth or USB Bluetooth types of devices. Headphones are really important for that quiet time to be able to focus. And also if you're talking, having headphones that kind of cancel out background noise so that you're more able to let the people you're talking to focus. That can be really helpful as well. And then wired internet may be a good idea. That was one of the things I discovered when I started working from a different room in the house. I went from having wired internet to having Wi-Fi only and realized how much worse my internet connection was. My speed, my uploads and downloads, everything was thrown off when I went to Wi-Fi in my house. I had a very weak signal where I was. So I wound up figuring out a way to run a little wire from the router to where I was and get that wired internet again. So that's something that may help a lot. Or you may find that getting some sort of, I forget what they're called, but like a web, I believe they're called, like an internet web or a mesh, which is like a system for redirecting the Wi-Fi signal in your house to make it stronger in areas where that current signal doesn't quite reach. You put a little hub in that space and it connects to the Wi-Fi and it boosts the signal in an area where you may have a bad signal. So we have that in our house too. Very old house with lots of quirks, and it is not good for Wi-Fi. So we've found all sorts of little ways to make it work. So think about that too. That makes a big difference, especially if you have more people in your house using more devices, using more streaming and downloading and all of that sort of stuff that is heavy bandwidth. You want to make sure that you have the right internet speed. So let's talk about your home office space. Find a dedicated space if you can. It does not have to be a whole room, but a place where you can say, I'm going to work. I'm going away to this space that I have designated for work. So for me, you can't really see it, but I'm in the corner of a guest room. There's a closet right here. There's a bed over here. And it is a good space for me to go because there's some doors that I can shut. So that's always helpful. You may find that just a corner in your living room or your own bedroom or someplace like that works. I've seen really creative things. You can see on this person at the top picture just has a little corner desk, and that's where they go to work in their living room. It's a space for them to actually go. It mentally prepares you to be ready for work, to get into that mode when you're in that space. And then when you leave that space, you can leave work behind. And then this person just set up a very simple curtain to block off that space. And I think that's also a good thing to note. The visual cue that you have when you see your work stuff, even if you're not actually working, if you walk past that space and you see your work laptop or your monitor or whatever, it signals to your brain work. It kind of alerts you like, hey, don't forget about work. And it's not always a good thing. Sometimes you want to be able to focus on other things and not get that signal that there's work around that you could be doing. So having like a curtain that you can pull over it, or closing your laptop, putting it away in a desk drawer, even just throwing a blanket over it or something like that, some pillows stacked up so you can't see it, that can actually really help you mentally break away from work at the end of your work time. I mentioned you want to go to the same space if you can every day. You can break it up a little bit. Some days you could go work from the kitchen, other days you could work from that space. But I would say if you have a dedicated space, that is really helpful. You don't always have to work from it. But boy, when you need to focus and get down to work and you're having a tough time doing it, getting into that one space that is your workspace can really help. And then you want to have maybe, if you can, options for standing and sitting. And I believe I have an example, yes, on this slide. So there were a couple different things. The first one on the left, this picture is a little home office tucked into a closet. So they redid the closet. They even hung artwork in the closet. They got a cool little lamp that clips onto a shelf. So they really did some deep thinking into what they wanted their office to look like. And they created a standing desk, actually. So they have a place where they can sit, but they also have this little, the laptop's on a little riser that can go up and down to sit and stand. Standing is a really nice way to work, even if it's for like 15 minutes at a time. It really changes your mindset. And so another person did a really very simple thing, using an ironing board as a standing desk, because you can raise it and lower it to the height that you want. And an ironing board, you could fit a decent amount. You could really put a second monitor on that if you wanted to. Make sure it's in kind of a stable place. But just like I said, you don't have to invest in lots of fancy things. You can get pretty creative with all the different ideas that are out there. This person needed a quiet place to work, so they actually got a desk for their car, and they just go out to the driveway. So if the kids are remote learning and their partner or their grandparents or whoever are living with them in the house, they're making noise throughout the house. This person needs to concentrate. They can go to their car, shut the door. They have a dedicated little space, and they can pick up the Wi-Fi from their house because it's in the driveway right outside. And then last but not least, on the far right side, this was a studio apartment that had one long hallway leading to the one main room in their apartment. And so this person just dragged a laundry hamper and a chair into that space. If you need a separate space to work for just a little bit, you can make do with things like this. And notice the background. So if this person is on a video call, they actually have a really nice, clean background for it. The rest of their house might be total chaos, but if you have that one nice little space behind you, it does make a big difference in video calls. So think about your home office space and how you can set that up. The next thing that remote workers do really well, who are good remote workers, is they set expectations with whoever might be living in their house. So friends, family, roommates, pets, they are letting the people in their house know that they're going to work, that they're coming home that they're leaving work, that they're not working anymore since they're coming home, but you're already home. My son, actually, the picture on the left is something that my son made for my home office, where he made stop and go signs, mainly for himself, so that I could hang those, and then he would know if it was safe to come in or if he should wait. Now, of course, he knows that if it's an emergency, he should always come in. And that's one of the nice things that has happened over the last 8 months or so, is most people have, I think anyway, that from what I've heard and seen and seen in surveys and things like that, most people have gotten a lot more comfortable with the life interrupting work and work interrupting life concept. So if your child or roommate or whoever runs into your Zoom call, it's not the end of the world. And even a year ago, I would say that that was one of those things you really wanted to avoid if possible, because it didn't seem too professional. But guess what? Everything's out the window. Now it's fine. So you want to set expectations and then also have a plan in place for if something like that does happen. So the second one is just this woman put up a sign that says, "Mom is in a meeting, do not enter." And then she put some typical answers to what the questions her kids might have, which I thought was pretty clever. And then this guy on the far right side actually designated, he didn't have a separate office space, but he wanted a space that people would know not to enter, because that was his space for working. So he put tape down on the floor and then put his little home office desk inside the tape. So it was just a visual cue for people to say, this is, my roommate or my dad or whoever's workspace. I shouldn't just jump right in there if I see him in there. It's kind of like putting up a stop and go sign if you don't have a door or a wall to hang those signs on. So the visual cue seems to be helpful. So I will mention one of the things, if you do have an interruption happen in a Zoom call, you want to have just a quick line to tell everybody that will help you get out of whatever you're doing on the Zoom, deal with the interruption, and then come back. So you can say something very simple like, "I'm so sorry about that. I'm going to go deal with this really quickly. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Thank you for understanding." That's it. Easy peasy. I think what happens, even me, and I've been doing this for 10 years from home, and I have 2 little kids now, I still panic when they come in the room. And so to have that in my head that just says, "I'm sorry about that. I'm going to come back in 2 minutes. Let me just deal with this. Thanks for understanding." And then mute yourself and turn your video off. Go deal with the interruption. Come on back. And just try not to make a big deal out of it with whoever you're working with. And hopefully they'll understand, because we're all human and this is what we're dealing with. But having that line can just help you navigate those tricky situations without too much panic. Okay, so let's talk about building relationships with your coworkers. So one big thing is you want to talk to your team about whatever reality you're in. So I said new reality, but really 8 months into this, it's not very new, but things are still changing. And depending on where you are, things may be very different than where your colleagues are. For example, on the FlexJobs coaching team, I live in Massachusetts. I have coaches in North Carolina, Florida, Minnesota, Colorado, Texas, and I know I'm going to be forgetting somebody, Illinois, all over the place, as you can see. And so the situation in each of those places is very different. Not to mention, a lot of them have children, so the situation with schooling, whether it's in school or remote, and when pickup times are and what the protocols are, it's all very different. So we have become really comfortable just telling each other what our reality is on that given day or week or month. So, as the numbers go back up, I am bracing myself for a potential return to remote learning, and I'm starting to think about how am I going to talk to my colleagues about that? How will that affect them? And trying to plan ahead as best I can. So telling your team, getting comfortable with that, and I have some scripts that you can use on the next slide, and then shifting your priorities at work as needed. And if you can think about this ahead of time, like let's say that the worst case scenario happens again, and it's a full lockdown and everybody's in your house again. How will you handle that? And start thinking about that right now, so that if that eventuality does come, or whatever other random scenario there might be, if you can plan ahead a little bit, then you can tell your team pretty quickly, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm going to be working on, and try to shift your priorities. Here's what I can focus on, here's what I need to put off till next week, and have some folks in mind who could help you with those things, and vice versa, be somebody who offers help to people who might be in that situation if you're not. And then ask your manager or HR, whoever is sort of the decision maker or who you feel most comfortable talking with, about how flexible your hours can be. In the last 8 months, companies have gotten better at this, about talking about flexible scheduling, allowing employees to take a flexible schedule, to shift their hours as needed. But it still may not be crystal clear to you what your options are. So I would have that conversation. Just say, I want to make sure that I am completely prepared to stay productive and effective no matter what happens. So I wanted to talk to you about potential schedule changes and how I might be able to shift my hours. You want to also talk to your team about what times you're generally working. One thing that I always say in a remote environment, it's really a good idea to say hello when you get to work and say goodbye when you leave work, just like you would in an office. So if you use Slack or email, whatever the preferred communication method is, if you can send a quick hello to your team, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is, and then say goodbye when you're about to step out. Oh, I'm heading out in about 10 minutes. I hope you all have a good night. That actually helps everyone else so much understand if you're there or not. And you may not remember to do it every single day, but it can be really helpful, just a simple hello and goodbye. And then the best ways to reach you if you're offline, because things are going to happen, things come up in any work arrangement that maybe it's a bit of an emergency or something urgent that people need to get in touch with you on. How can they contact you? Should they text you? Should they call you? What's the best number? Is there a backup number? Because, for example, one of my coaches has poor cell service in her house. We can text her and she usually gets those, but she doesn't necessarily get the phone calls right away. Sometimes those don't connect well. So I know if I need to call her, I should call her house number and I can text her cell phone number. And these are for very rare circumstances, and you can set that expectation too. In the event of a major emergency, you can contact me this way, because you don't want to invite people to just be, texting and calling whenever. But giving them that understanding just helps everybody work better when something urgent does come up. And then just be in regular communication with the people that you're working with. You want to talk to them about the basics: who, when, where, how. Talk to them about who needs to be told about what, who you're communicating with on a regular basis. When are there scheduled meetings, or is this more of a casual thing? Where you're actually going to be communicating, meaning which platforms, and that may be different depending on the type of communication that you need to do. And then how, is it going to be video or phone call? I think one of the things that we've all sort of assumed, which was interesting to me at the beginning of this, was that if you get a link to a conference, like a Zoom or a GoTo meeting, something like that, that it's definitely on video. And interestingly, the teams and companies that have been working remotely forever don't look at it that way. Video is rarely the first option. We do a little bit of video, but mostly it's just audio. And that's because being on video a lot can be very exhausting. So if you have 3 meetings a week and they're all on video with the same people, those people are going to get tired eventually. So being specific about how are we actually doing this? Is it a video call? Is it a phone call? Do we have to do video every time? That's all really important to iron out, because most really high functioning remote teams understand that video is helpful and can be really nice to see people, but it's exhausting if you do it too much. So maybe start that conversation, because you may find that other people on your team also raise their hands and go, yeah, I feel the same way. And then also getting really comfortable with synchronous versus asynchronous communication, meaning synchronous when you're all working at the same time and you're communicating at that actual time together, versus asynchronous when you're maybe not working at the same time and you send a message and then a few hours later somebody responds. And really just talking about what are the norms for that. If you know somebody is not working at that moment, should you send them an instant message or an online chat, or would it be better to email them and just get their gist on it? A lot of what you're doing as a good remote worker is communicating and asking the people that you're working with for their preference for things like that, and then also signaling your preference as well. Okay, so a few more things to go over, and then we will talk about the frequently asked questions that we usually get. So these are some conversation starters, as I mentioned before, some scripts that you can use to handle all sorts of things. So let's dive into the first one. To talk with your boss or coworkers about that current reality that you're going through, you can say something really brief, and this can be an email or it can be during a call that you have or a meeting. I want to share my current reality to give everyone a good understanding and try to stay ahead of any potential problems. So I think sometimes we feel like, well, I don't want to just be telling everybody like, oh, what's going on in my personal life and we have to deal with this and this thing. But how you want to frame it is you want everybody to just understand where you're coming from and stay on top of any potential problems that this may cause or bring up, or hopefully you'll avoid them. So that's a good way to just to kind of broach that subject. And then if you need to ask for more flexibility, like in your hours, you could say something like, I'd like to get a good sense of what my flexible work options are right now. The more I'm able to shift my schedule, the better able I'll be to meet work priorities and stay productive during this time. Again, you are framing it around productivity, staying on top of priorities, handling problems before they become a problem, which is really critical for everything that we are doing as remote workers in this really unpredictable, unprecedented time. And then for the beginning of meetings where you think maybe there's a chance you might be interrupted, you can say, as is the case with a lot of you, I'm working from home and caring for my X-year-old and X-year-old kids, in my case, 7 and 2. I want to give you a heads up that I may get interrupted during our call, but I'll let you know, I'll mute myself, I'll deal with the situation, and I'll jump right back in. And you're really just saying, hey, just to give you a heads up, this may happen, but I'm going to handle it and I will come right back. And that way, everybody's prepared for that potential thing happening, and you're feeling a little bit more confident. And it also, talking like this actually invites other people to say, oh, I'm in the same situation. I have similar aged kids, or I have 3 roommates, or whatever it might be. I have dogs, I have cats, anything like that. And it just also connects you to that person a little bit more. You're sharing details about your life that maybe don't come up all the time. And commiserating a little bit, which at a higher level, not misery loves company piling it on, but just a little bit of this communication and talking about the issues that are going on can actually help connect you to your team more and allow all of you to better support each other, which is really important. This is a little template we came up with. We call a quarantine update to your boss. And we recommend sending this so you can ask your boss ahead of time, would this be helpful? But something that we've heard could be helpful for managers is when you are maybe you're working asynchronously a lot, so you're not really online at the same times, maybe you don't meet very often, sending them a weekly update like this can be really helpful. So it can just say something like updates, work and life this week. And then you want to tell your boss about life and work changes, anything that's going to affect work. So you're shifting your hours, you have to take Thursday afternoon off. You're waiting for the results from this, which will dictate that. Anything like that that may affect work, just at kind of a high level to give them a heads up. You tell them what you're working on for the week, and then you tell them about any progress and wins you've had. And the reason that is important is because you also want to remind them, hey, I have all these crazy life things going on, but I'm productive, I'm effective, I'm getting my job done. Here are some of the good things I've done in the last week. As a remote worker, one of the hardest things is giving yourself credit for that sort of stuff and being your own best advocate, speaking up for yourself, patting yourself on the back, showing the value that you're bringing. It's really uncomfortable for some people. So if you can do it in this quiet way where you're saying, hey, here's the progress and wins, but you're giving them that information every week so that they can see you're making regular progress, that can be really helpful, just to keep them on that page, and also know and to remind you, to remind them that you are a valuable member of the team. So that's something that you could send weekly. You could ask them what their preferences are. Would they like it once a week, once every couple weeks? Do they want it at the beginning of the week, the end of the week? All that sort of stuff. If you have a weekly meeting, maybe this is sort of an agenda that you send out to talk about, but keeping your boss in the loop is really important. Okay, and so some just kind of best practices to wrap things up, and then I believe I can dive into the questions. The first is really watching yourself for signs of isolation. So where you are not around people a lot, actually working face-to-face with them, you might start to feel a little bit lonely. And this is especially the case for people who used to work in an office, who are now working remotely and maybe living on their own. And so before, you used to see people all day long. You'd see them in your commute, you'd see them at the office, you may hang out after the office, and then your commute home. It was full of people, and it's gone from full of people to not at all. And so it's really important to watch out for that and to have some ways of coping with that, to get more people interaction into your life. And also, if it's becoming something that is really affecting your day-to-day living, using resources like they have at Mental Health America to do a little assessment for yourself and see if there's something that maybe you need to seek help for, and to get some support for. And I know Mental Health America has some great resources for that, in terms of their assessments, things that you can do online really quickly, confidentially, and it just helps you to understand where you are, in the spectrum of isolation. Is it okay? Is it manageable? Is it something that you feel you can tackle yourself? Or is it something that you need to seek some support on from an outside person? Overwork is another major problem with remote work, because work is always there. It's not something you can actually walk away from. I know email and laptops have made work more portable for a long time. And so work is often wherever you are. But in this case, it's literally where you are. It's in your house all the time. So watch out for that, and try to think of ways to stop yourself from working, whether it's making plans that you can't, you have to stop work at a certain time to get on a Zoom call with friends, or do a virtual workout, or go for a walk with a neighbor, or whatever it might be, or make dinner, things like that. Using video calls occasionally, but not all the time. Using task lists and time management tools to really keep yourself on track and understand what are your priorities every day. Being a good self-manager and really being critical of yourself, and kind of making sure that you're focused, you're on task, and you're staying in your seat when you need to get something done, because the laundry can be a very big distraction. Little things like that around your house can distract you, especially if you are trying to procrastinate doing something that you should be doing at work, but that is just not a project you're very enthusiastic about. So watch out for that and be a really good self-manager. Take breaks, though. Definitely take breaks. Regular breaks can be really helpful. There's a lot of different methods that you can use. Some people use the Pomodoro technique, which is where you work for 25 minutes straight, focused work, and then you take a 5-minute break, and then you do 25 more minutes, and then a 5-minute break. Some people just like to set an alarm to get up every hour or 2 hours, do some stretching, go outside for some air, and then get back to work. Whatever works for you, but just make sure you're really taking those breaks. And then when you're actually taking the break, one thing I have been coaching myself on lately is staying off the screen. So even if you walk away from your computer, don't be jumping on your phone and doing your screen there. Get away from screens altogether on those breaks. It's way more refreshing. Communicate. I know I've mentioned it a million times already, but communicate really well with your coworkers, with your boss, with HR, whoever needs to be involved. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And then if you want some more resources, there's a really good resource. Google has put this Grow with Google remote work platform together, and it has a lot of good resources just for teaching yourself how to be a good remote worker. It reinforces some of the things that I've mentioned on this presentation. It's got more detail on different things, and it's all free and open to the public. So grow.google/remote work, and grow.google has a lot of interesting learning opportunities as well, but this one is specifically related to remote work. Okay, so to come to the end of the actual presentation, I do have some questions that often come up around this that I wanted to mention. I'm going to pull up my list here. So one of the questions we often get is what equipment do employers typically provide for remote workers? So I mentioned the equipment that's really good to have, and each employer decides what to offer on its own. Some employers provide you with your laptop, your monitor, your headset, kind of all those basic technology pieces. And then some employers provide you with a stipend where you can actually go purchase that equipment, but you're kind of choosing what you want. And so if you already have a monitor that you really like, you don't have to get that, but maybe you could get a standing desk or something like that. So some employers do it that way. Some employers operate on what's called a BYOD policy, which is bring your own device, BYOD, which means you are responsible for setting up your home office. I would ask, because over the last 8 months, a lot of employers have evolved their policies, and there may be something available to you that wasn't even 4 months ago. So I would ask just to see what is available. Things like a second monitor, a headset, a keyboard and wireless mouse, wireless keyboard and mouse, I should say, a webcam that is separate from your laptop camera can be helpful if you are going to be doing a lot of video. And then a really comfortable chair and maybe a standing desk, one that kind of rises. It can be set on top of an existing desk, but it helps you raise up your whole workstation. I have one of those, can't recommend it enough. Makes it very comfortable to work while you're standing. And then those are kind of the main things that employers may provide, but I would check with your employer. Even if they hadn't offered things before, they might be starting to do that now. Another question we often get is, how do you stay healthy when you work from home? What are some tips for staying healthy when you work in the same place as a well-stocked kitchen? So there's a few different things. The first is to remind yourself to get up and move. I have a coworker who keeps a yoga mat on her office floor so that she looks at it, like she can actually see it. It distracts her from work for a second, and she thinks, I'll just do a quick little, 5 minutes of yoga, stretching, just to get moving. That's one thing. But getting up and moving in whatever way that works for you can be really helpful. You might call a dance break in the middle of the day and just put on some music and start dancing, whatever works for you. But getting up, moving, doing some stretching, getting some fresh air can be really helpful. Second option, leave your house, even if it's for 5 minutes, just to breathe deeply outside and stare at a tree or the sky or grass, anything natural. It sounds really silly to say that, but there are many studies that have shown that connecting with nature visually and through your other senses, smell, sound, even for 5 minutes, it can lower your blood pressure, it can energize you. It's got a lot of really good benefits, and it helps you focus more also. Skip sugary snacks. This is something I have to tell myself all the time. In the long run, you'll get into those highs and lows of energy, spikes and dips, and it's really unhealthy in the long run. So if you can stick to snacks that are going to give you prolonged energy, that are not the sugary variety, that can be really helpful. And then take care of your eyes as well. Staring at a screen for a long time, especially if you're doing video calls, where you're really kind of focusing on one spot, it can do a lot of wear and tear on your eyes. So there are blue blocking glasses that can help. I have those actually. So they're just glasses. They look like any other regular glasses, but they're not good for video calls because you can see the reflection, but they filter the blue light out of the screen and help you kind of stay away from that. Good for your eyes, good for your sleep patterns, all that sort of stuff. That's kind of a big thing too. And give yourself time to rest. So even if you're not getting up from your chair, look away from your screen every 20 minutes or so for like a minute. And that really does help. And then what are some ways to structure your day is another question we get. You want to try to stick to a schedule if you can. Set up a work area that you can come and go from, so work's not always with you wherever you are. And then get dressed is the other very simple way to structure your day. I find, and I've heard this from many remote workers, if you get dressed in at least casual clothes, I'm not wearing anything fancy today, but I did officially get out of my pajamas and into regular adult clothes, that can really help you to just feel ready to go to work. And then lastly, how can I shift my hours? So we talked about asking your manager for a more flexible schedule, or if you can shift your hours, but what are the different ways you can actually do that? There are a few different options, and then you can get more creative than this, but here are just some creative options to get you thinking. The first is to have shifted hours. So that's where you either start earlier or later in the day, and then you end earlier or later in the day. So you take a block of time, let's say you're working 8 hours, but you shift it from that standard, 9 to 5 or whatever it is, you shift it to work earlier or later, you're still working the same number of hours and you're working them all at once, but you are changing when you're starting and ending your workday. So that's one thing. Doing a split shift where you work earlier in the morning and then you take a break in the middle of the day, and then you work later in the evening, like late afternoon, early evening, or even late into the evening, depending on how best you work, so that you have a big gap in the middle of the day where you can do personal life things, and then you're still getting your full hours in just earlier and later in the day. And then there's a little bit more drastic options. So one of them is a 5-hour workday, but a 7-day work week. So you're working about 35 hours a week. And of course, these are things you have to iron out specifically with your employer. You could do like 5.5 hours a day to get to your 40-hour work week, but that you are spreading it out over 7 days. So instead of trying to cram all of your work into Monday through Friday, you're spreading it out. You're using all of the days of the week. You could also shift the days that you're working. So maybe you work Wednesday to Sunday and Monday and Tuesday are days off, something like that. And then lastly, this has been around for a long time, but a 10-hour workday, 4 days a week, so that you have 3 days off every week is another option. So these are things just to talk to, figure out what would work best for your situation, and then you can talk to your manager or HR about what your options might be, and that way you can kind of sync up between what you would ideally like, what they're willing to offer, and find hopefully some sort of compromise that works. So those are just some of the questions that we often get when we talk about this topic. That means it's the end of my presentation. So thank you all very much for viewing this. Again, this is Brie Reynolds with FlexJobs, and thanks to Mental Health America for giving us the chance to do this presentation. If you'd like more information, you can go to flexjobs.com, and of course, visit Mental Health America. They have great resources, and I wish you all the best of luck as remote workers. Thanks, everyone.